Good afternoon, students. So, in the previous classes, we have discussed the basics about cybercrime and cyber laws. So, in this class, we are going to discuss about digital evidence. So, evidence is very, very important whenever we are dealing with any cases in court. So, whenever trial is happening, evidence plays very, very important. Without proper evidence, it is not possible to ensure punishment for the criminal. So evidence is very, very important. So evidence is governed by Digital Evidence Act. So evidence is governed by Indian Evidence Act. Indian Evidence Act. So you can also refer it as IEA. In Indian Evidence Act, both, that is physical evidence as well as digital or computer evidence, is included. Okay, so there is no separate act for digital evidences. Okay, so even the digital evidences are included in the Indian Evidence Act. Now there are some definitions related to evidences. So the section 62 of Indian Evidence Act section 62 of Indian Evidence Act speaks about primary evidence. So primary evidence means the document itself is produced for the inspection of the court. So there are basically two explanations concerned with this definition. So what it says is primary evidence means the document itself is produced for the inspection of the court. So the explanation 1 says where a document is executed in several parts. Each part is a primary evidence of the document. Where a document is executed in counterparts. Each counterpart being executed by one or more one or some of the parties only. Each counterpart is primary evidence as against the parties executing it. Now, when we speak of evidence, basically there are two types of evidences. One is oral evidence, then second one is document evidence. So, oral evidence is the one where the witness comes to the court and he is going to tell whatever he has seen or heard directly. That means he has been the direct witness of the crime. Say for example, maybe there on the road some murder has happened and there were some witnesses who has watched that murder live. So those persons who have watched that murder live, they can come to the court and they can give the statement. So this is an example for oral evidence. The next is document evidence. So document evidence is something, let's say for example, again the scene of murder. So murder is happening in a park. So there are few people, what they do is they take their mobile phone and click a photograph of it. So they have created a document. So this photograph is nothing but the evidence which has captured the murder live. It may be video also. So this is documentary evidence or document evidence. So as I have told you, so evidence can be classified as two types, oral evidence and documentary evidence. Now this documentary evidence can be classified as again two types. That is primary evidence and secondary evidence. So let's see what is meant by primary evidence with respect to document evidence. So primary evidence means the document itself is produced for the inspection of the court. Say for example, I have given you the example of capturing the photograph of a murderer who is committing the murder. So in that case, this photograph itself is the document and which can be produced in the court for the inspection. Now what kind of inspection will happen? We know that now the technology is fast changing, it is becoming more and more advanced day by day. So there is a possibility that that photograph may be morphed, that photograph can be changed or it should have been changed. Maybe the face of the murderer has been changed. So it is possible. So such things can be challenged in the court. So because of that, care has to be taken. So the court will see the validity of the photograph in case it is the document. Now the first explanation is that where a document is executed in several parts, each part is the primary evidence of the document. Now see here, when I say document, it is not just a single page or a single photograph or just one screen of a video. There can be multiple photographs. Okay, there can be multiple photographs or multiple scenes in a video, or it can be multi-page document. So when you consider a single page, single photograph or single scene in the video, each part can be considered as primary evidence. Second, where a document is executed in counterparts, each counterpart being executed by one or some of the parties only. So each counterpart is primary evidence as against the parties executing it. So we need to understand the difference between the part and the counterpart. So part is part of any document, whereas counterpart can be either of the part, or it's a part which complements another part. So when a part which complements another part, it becomes a counterpart. So in that case also it is an evidence. Okay, so both part of a document and counterparts of a document, which can be one or more, can also be considered as primary evidence. Then let us look at the second explanation. So second explanation says, where a number of documents are all made by one uniform process, as in the case of printing, lithography or photography, each is primary evidence of the contents of the rest, but where they are copies of a common original, they are not primary evidence of the contents of the original. Okay, so what the second explanation says is, where a number of documents are all made by one uniform process, as in the case of printing, lithography or photography, each is a primary evidence of the contents of the rest. But where they are copies of the common original, they are not primary evidence of the contents of the original. So here in this explanation there are basically two parts. So the first part speaks about that there is a set of documents. That means you have a collection of photographs or some document which you have printed which spans over multiple pages, where each part can be considered as an evidence. It can be considered as an primary evidence. But let's say for example you have a photograph now and you have taken the Xerox of it, or you have taken the color print of it. Now in that case, this color printed copy or Xerox copy cannot be considered as a primary evidence. Okay? It's very simple. If the document is generated with some uniform process and if there are multiple documents, they are considered as primary evidence. But if you have made the copy of the evidence, then any part of the copy of the evidence cannot be called as primary evidence. Now let's see about secondary evidence. Now section 63 of Indian Evidence Act speaks about secondary evidence. Section 62 speaks about primary evidence. Section 63 speaks about secondary evidence. So let's see what is meant by secondary evidence and what all is included in the secondary evidence. So secondary evidence means and includes one, certified copies given under the provisions hereinafter contained. Second, copies made from the original by mechanical process which in themselves ensure the accuracy of the copy and copies compared with such copies. Then third one, copies made from or compared with the original. Fourth one, counterparts of documents. As against the parties. Who did not execute them. Fifth one, oral account of the contents of a document given by some person who has himself seen it. So the secondary evidence is a bit complex compared to the primary evidence. Here we are speaking about the copies of the original document or certified copies of the document, certified copies of the original document. Then we are also speaking about the counterparts of the original document. Then we are also speaking about the oral accounts of the contents of a document. Okay. So it is very complex here to define what is meant by secondary evidence. So let's see one by one. So certified copies given under the provisions herein after contained. So here we can consider, for example, let's say post-mortem report. If you request, then the doctor may give you multiple copies of the same document. Okay. Or your transcripts. So your transcripts are generally given in multiple copies. So all these individual copies can be considered as secondary evidence. Okay. So university also gives you one copy. So that is considered as secondary evidence. Then the second one is copies made from the original by mechanical process, which in themselves ensure the accuracy of the copy and the copies compared with such copies. Now let's say, for example, there is a marks card. Now this marks card is xeroxed. Now when you xerox the original marks card, you will get a copy of it, and when you compare, the content of both the document must be same, and this xerox copy must be again certified. Okay, so without certification, without attestation by notary or person who is a gazetted officer, it will not be considered. Okay. Now if there is a difference between the original and the xerox copy with respect to the content, then the xerox copy will not be considered as secondary evidence. Then third one is copies made from or compared with the original. Okay. So any copy, say again let's consider the xerox copy. If it is matching with the original and it is certified, it is considered as secondary evidence. The next, counterparts of the documents as against the parties who did not execute them. Now let's say, for example, there is a document called as will. So in will, maybe your grandfather or a grandmother or your parents, they have divided the property among their children. Now in this case what happens is, it's a whole document, but it has got several parts. Okay, together or one or more parts will make it a counterpart of the document. But if by any chance, if some person did not execute the part of the will, then that part can be considered as secondary evidence. Okay. The next, oral accounts of the contents of a document given by some person who has himself seen it. Now let's say, for example, you have a marks card and one of your friend has seen it. He knows the marks and the class which is mentioned in the marks card. And let's assume that your marks card is misplaced somewhere. And if that statement, if that person says that he has seen the marks card and you have obtained so much marks, then that can be considered as the secondary evidence, because it is the oral statement made by your friend who himself has seen your marks card. Okay. So compared to primary evidence, secondary evidence is a little bit complicated. So it involves certified copies, parts of the document or counterparts of the document which have never been executed. Now let's see the definition of electronic evidence. Again, there is a section in Indian Evidence Act which defines what is meant by electronic evidence. So section 3.2 of Indian Evidence Act says electronic evidence is documentary evidence all documents including electronic records produced for the inspection of the court such documents are called documentary evidence. Then section 2T of IT Act 2000 states electronic record means data, record, or data generated image or sound stored, received, or sent in electronic form or microfilm or computer generated microfiche. Okay. So now you can see here there are two definitions basically uh, with respect to the electronic evidence. So first definition is given by section 3.2 of Indian Evidence Act. Then section 2T of Information Technology Act 2000 also says what is electronic evidence and what are the various forms and examples. Now let's see the first definition, that is electronic evidence is a documentary evidence. This is very important. It is not oral evidence. Okay, because the document can be considered as a photograph. So photograph can be considered as document, audio file can be considered as document, your screenshot of the screen can be considered as the documentary evidence. Okay, video can also be considered as an documentary evidence. So any electronic evidence you take, it is documentary evidence. So what it says is all documents including electronic records produced for the inspection of the court such as documents are called documentary evidence. I have already told you what are the different types of documents. It can be any multimedia file, it can be text file, it can be your program, it can be your executable file, it can be image, audio, video, whatever. Even an XML file, source code file, database record file, a log file. So all can be considered as documentary evidence. The next section 2T of Information Technology Act 2000 says electronic record means the data. So data is a generic term. So if we see this definition, they have mentioned in very generic sense what can be considered as electronic record. Okay. So data can be a data in your Word file, Excel file, XML file, or the data stored in a database, or the data stored in a log file. Anything can be considered as data here. Then record or data generated. So again record can be, again it's a row in a table, or a row or a column in a Excel file. Okay, basically record consists of multiple rows and multiple columns, whereas it is not the same for data. One more thing is the data can be either manually fed or it can be generated data. Okay. Or it can be again a generated image, generated audio, or it is a stored audio, or a created audio, created video, or generated video. Okay. And also it is if somebody has sent to these records, say for example some photograph, some document, or some audio or video file through some email, through some WhatsApp, so even that is considered as an electronic evidence. Okay. Now you might have extracted the information from microfilm. Okay, or computer generated microfiche. Microfiche is nothing but again a microfilm. Okay. Even if there is a computer generated microfilm, and if you have extracted the information from that microfilm, so even that is considered as an electronic record, and everything comes under, and all these can be considered as electronic evidence. So in this, now that we have seen the definition of evidence, the types of evidence, we will now see how to acquire the evidence and how to handle the digital evidence. Now we are going to discuss few things in this chapter, basically how to acquire the data and how to seize the evidence. So we are going to discuss acquisition and seizure of evidence. Then we are going to discuss chain of custody and digital evidence collection form. So whenever you are collecting the digital evidence, you need to maintain evidence collection form, and you need to maintain all the data, all the information in digital evidence form. Then Fourth Amendment and seizure. So in Fourth Amendment, we are going to discuss several things: what can be seized, what can be considered whenever the officer comes and he wants to search your equipments or a house. So there are basically two things here. Officer can search your house without warrant some things, and with warrant some things. So we'll discuss what are those things later. So acquisition of computer and electronic evidence, acquisition of evidence from email and internet, then acquisition of evidence from mobile phone and PDA, acquisition of evidence from optical and removable media and digital camera, acquisition of evidence from the third party, external agency or organization. Now, if you see here, there are different devices can be used to commit a crime. So, a criminal may use a laptop to commit a crime, or he may use a mobile phone to commit a crime, or a PDA to commit a crime, or a tablet to commit a crime, or some other modern device to commit a crime. Maybe he may use a smartwatch to commit a crime, or a Google Glass to commit a crime. So now he has got a lot of options. So extracting the information and seizing the information from all these devices is a different process. So we will see what are those different processes and how it should be done, and what care we need to take whenever we are extracting the information as evidence from these different devices. Then challenges to acquisition of digital evidence, then handling of digital evidence. Handling of digital evidence is very, very important, and you have to take extraordinary measures to protect the digital evidence. It is not same as your physical evidence. Okay, so we'll see what is the difference between the digital evidence and physical evidence later. Then precautions involved in handling the digital evidence. Okay. Now, let's move to the next topic, that is preliminaries of electronic or digital evidence. Now, there are different roles played by digital evidence. Okay, there are basically 5 roles. One is the object or a victim, second one is the subject, third one is the witness, fourth one is the tool, and fifth one is the accomplice. Okay. Now, the first one is object or a victim. So, object or victim is nothing but when your device has been affected by the crime. Okay. Let's say, for example, somebody has hacked your computer, has hacked your laptop. Then, your laptop is the object or a victim. Okay. Now, it has affected you. The crime has affected you. Okay. So, that means you are going to become a victim. Let's say, for example, kidnapper has kidnapped you, that means you are a victim. Okay. Now, next is the subject. Subject is the person who actually commits the crime against you. Okay. Witness. Witness can be one person or two persons, or it can be any other evidence which basically records the happening of the crime. Okay. Say, for example, if somebody is stealing some jewels in the jewelry shop, and if some customer has seen it, then he will become the witness. Okay. Now, witness is interesting part here. It can be physical witness or it can be documentary witness. For example, if you have put CCTV camera for surveillance, then that CCTV recordings can be considered as a witness here. The next is the tool. Tool is the software or a hardware which is used to commit a crime. Okay. Let's say, for example, there are some websites using which you can send fake emails, and when you send fake emails, it basically appears that the mail has come from genuine source. Okay. Now, that website can be a tool here to perform a crime, basically to spread misinformation. Okay, if you are spreading some rumors through WhatsApp, then your mobile phone becomes a tool to commit a crime. Okay. The next is the accomplice. Accomplice is something, let's assume that in case of murder or in case of robbery, if there are some people who is helping the criminal to commit the crime, then they become accomplice. Now, in case of digital evidence, in case of cyber crime, it is the vulnerability or the loophole in the software becomes the accomplice. Because of this vulnerability or the loophole, the attacker is able to commit a crime. Okay. So, these are 5 important roles played by digital evidence: object or a victim, then the subject, witness, tool, and accomplice. Okay. So, object or a victim is, it is against you, the crime has happened, you are affected by the crime. Subject is the person who commits the crime against you. Witness records the happening of the crime. Then tool, it's a software or a hardware which is used to perform the attack or a crime. Accomplice is the vulnerability or the loophole in the software or a hardware or a system which helps you to commit, which helps the attacker to commit a crime. Okay. Now, there are some characteristics of digital evidence. Now, what are these characteristics? The first characteristic of digital evidence is it is invisible. So, what do you mean by invisible? Now note here that whatever activities you do in a computer, it is recorded and stored in the log files. And these log files are not directly visible. Okay. So whatever you are doing, all the activities are logged. So all your actions are recorded. So with respect to your web browser, okay, your web browser maintains a history of when you have visited a website, which website you have visited, on which all days you have visited. Okay. So your browser tracks your activity, it tracks your internet activity. Then similarly, if you are doing some activity on some website, on server side also there are some tools and technologies which have been installed or which are installed, and the server logs the activity of each and every user. Okay, so server will come to know which user has visited from which place, which state, which country, what is his IP address, from which website he has visited our website. Has he visiting the website directly, or he has come through some referral link, or he has come through Google or Bing or some search engine. Okay. So what is the port number of the machine from which the request has come? What is the IP address of the machine from which the request has come? Okay. How much time the user has spent? Which browser he has used? Whether he has used mobile or a desktop to visit a link. So all this information can be logged. But note here that all this information is hidden. It is not directly visible. So that's why you need special tools to extract these evidences. The next is highly fragile and volatile. Now note here that this is very, very important. Whenever you are doing some activity, your information or the activity related information can be stored in volatile memory, such as RAM, okay, which is a temporary memory. Okay. And it is very important to capture this information as soon as possible. Otherwise, the investigating officer may lose an important information which may help his investigation. Okay. Since it is a fragile, that means it is easily modified or its copy can be made easily. Now, the digital evidence is available in various devices, locations and formats. Okay. So now, criminals use different devices at a time. Let's say, for example, the same person may use simultaneously many devices. He may check, let's consider the example of checking emails and sending emails. So he may use his laptop to send an email, but he may use his mobile phone to check an email and reply. Okay. So similarly, he may use his laptop and mobile phone both to visit some websites and to perform some activities. Okay. But the information stored on laptop is different, the information stored on mobile phone is different. Okay. But if you capture only the laptop or only mobile phone, it may not lead you to the correct investigation. Again, there is a possibility of losing some evidence. But when you consider, when you seize laptop and mobile phones data, and when you combine together, then you may get correct insights which will lead the investigation in the correct direction. And the data stored in laptop and mobile phone can be different. It can be in different formats. For example, the attacker may use Windows operating system on the laptop, but he may use Android operating system on mobile phone. So both of these different operating systems store data in different formats. Okay. Then locations. Now let's say, for example, the user may not carry his laptop, he may keep his laptop at home, but he will carry his mobile phone wherever he goes. Okay. So he is performing different activities on laptop, he is performing different activity on a mobile phone. So this location data becomes very, very important to identify the location of the criminal, where he was, when he was, to track his activities. Now digital evidence can be easily altered or destroyed. Since everything is maintained in the soft copy, it can be easily altered. Okay, that's why we need to take a lot of precautions, and we need to ensure that the data is not altered once it is seized. If it is altered after seizing, then it is not admissible in the court. Okay, the digital evidence will not be admissible in the court if it is altered or modified. The next, specialized training and handling is required. Okay. Now let's say, for example, there's a hard disk. We cannot handle that hard disk just like any other device. Special care has to be taken. As soon as you take control over the hard disk, you need to ensure that the hard disk is in read-only mode. That means at any cost, nothing will be altered on the hard disk. And it has to be stored in a safe place, cool place, okay, where the environmental factors such as temperature should not corrupt the data. Okay. So such things needs to be taken care. Specialized training is required. That is because you need to extract data sometimes live, okay, sometimes offline. So without switching off the computer, you need to capture the data. Okay. So that to do that, you need specialized training. Portable. So digital evidence can be portable. That means multiple copies can be made and it can be distributed at different locations. The next is time sensitive. This is very, very important. You need to acquire the evidence as soon as possible. If you make a delay, then that information may be corrupted, modified, or lost. And many times, if you delay, whatever data you get, it may not be an important data. Let's say, for example, RAM data, the data stored in random access memory. You should try to capture data as soon as possible, because the data stored in RAM keeps on changing based on the activities. Now, let's see the difference between the physical evidence and the digital evidence. Now, as we have discussed, there are two types of evidences. One is the digital evidence, second one is the physical evidence. Now, physical evidence can be tampered, but if you tamper the physical evidence, it leaves discernible marks. You will come to know whether the evidence has been tampered or not very easily. But in case of digital evidence, unauthorized copies can be made. But in case of physical evidence, you cannot make unauthorized copies. But in case of digital evidence, you can make unauthorized copies. Okay. And very important part is it never leaves any trace. Okay. It never leaves any trace, because they are just making a copy. They are not altering it. Okay. So there are no marks, no traces left with respect to digital evidence, but tampering is easy. So even if you tamper it, it may not leave any traces. So that's why whenever you capture the data, you should enter into the read-only mode. So make data read-only, so that by any means data should not be modified. Okay. Let's see next concept in the next class. Thank you.